I decided to be a photographer quite early, actually, because both my parents were photographers. And so I kind of grew up in a world of photography, or where it was very normal to do shootings or to go photograph something. And I was also as a model as a kid in many things of my parents, etc. So I was always very familiar with me. And then unfortunately my father died when I was quite young still, and so I kind of got all his, inheritance, all his works and his archive and cameras, and so that was always like something very important for me. But then when towards the end of the school, so when I was already late teenager, I started to be interested a bit more in photography and started experimenting, etc. And then I did a school or university type in Hamburg for art direction and also commercial photography. And I really saw that I know a lot about it already, and then I helped others. The thing was to come up with ideas and then produce them yourself. So we had to do all our campaigns that we did in school ourselves. And so I finished school and then started to build up a portfolio and started to work, etc. And also ever since I was very interested in fine art and also fine art photography. These were my first big heroes, kind of like Gursky, etc. From the beginning on, I also was trying to go in that direction or try to make something artistic as well. My style is quite painterly, if you want, to a certain extent, with a bit of a surreal touch maybe, and quite graphic or quite strong compositions with maybe abstract aspects. I like it that also if you only see an image, if it's on the wall from the corner of your eye, etc., that it really has a strong composition with abstract qualities. But then the beauty is that it's kind of real, so it always bounces between real and unreal or fake. But then, of course, also other aspects, as I said, like graphic aspects, composition goes into it, or quotes from art history or architecture, anything, that might interest me or ideas that I get along the way. I can pack it all in because I work with this collage method, I say, where I start off with a sketch, basically, as if I do a sketch for a painting, but then I build it out of photographic elements, and then I photograph my figures or my people in the studio or in a controlled environment, and then I build it all together. So it's a very controlled and slow process. Of course, I shoot stuff, but then how these images come to life is only post-production, and so I'm very interested in post-production as well, and I spend a lot of time with this. But then I also work with professional post-production companies to reach that level of perfection. Basically, since I always start off with a sketch, it's really important in my process that I keep looking at that sketch, So when I'm in the studio, it's a very abstract work, the models are there. They cannot look into my head. I also, there's mostly not the time to fill them in completely. So I just tell them for them super weird abstract things, I don't know, eat a burger, do this, point there, look there, do this, blah, blah, blah. And they just do it like robots. Basically, you started with a series on pleasure grounds, which was my first series and very important for my development, etc. Because that's kind of where I got the idea of constructing this parallel world. And it was that on a trip through the USA, actually I was on a work trip there, but then we were traveling. I saw such a little museum type park outside an army base where they showed these missiles and these weapons of mass destruction, and they had little signs, like in a museum, obviously, where they said, yeah, that's the name of the bomb and it was used there and there, I don't know, Afghanistan, Iraq, and it killed that many people, etc. So I found this very cynical and really extremely irritating. And then on the same in the same moment, of course, everything in life is always a bit ambivalent. These weapons have something impressive as well, and maybe even something, an aesthetic quality, definitely a strong presence, and I found them very interesting. And I just took photos of them without thinking about it anymore. Yeah, and then looking at these photos, and in the following days, I looked at them and I found them really cool, but then they were not to my ideal. And I already used this practice to photograph in places and then turn the photographs into how I perceive the place and not how I actually managed to photograph it, you know. So for instance, I turn a small room into a big room just by removing the perspectives. Yeah, and so I had this idea, I reconstruct this amusement park, and with exactly this method I photographed the missiles separately and then collecting all the architectural elements I wanted to use, walls, and then I made sketches and I came up with architectures that could be involved in a series and built them out of these elements. Then I photographed people, the visitors of this park in London in the studio, actually like you would shoot a fashion scene or a movie. I did a casting and I got, I don't know, I think about 20 or no, maybe 10 people from all over the place, and we had amazing costumes, vintage costumes, to make it all very postcardish. Yeah, and then I had this idea to create a contrast to the weapons, to also use animals in the same park. So it will be an amusement park featuring weapons and animals. And so I also photographed animals and then created this weird park. So the Western Magic was the last one I did. Actually, now I'm working on a new one, but that was the last one I finished. And luckily I managed that it also went into the book. And the idea was basically to show something like a family constellation, but with businessmen, basically with white old businessmen, and to create kind of a surreal sculpture garden in which these businessmen perform their magic, if you want. And the idea is just like in such a constellation that through different objects and the relations they build to each other, meaning is transported, or certain ideas are generated and a certain energy starts to exist. So yeah, maybe first really quick to the series Modernist Lunch Break, which I like quite a bit, and it's also quite important. I had the pleasure to exhibit it quite a bit, also in Istanbul, which was a brilliant experience, really nice, and also to be invited and be in Istanbul and experience the festival was great, nice venues, etc. And the series was basically, the idea was to show, very simple, to show people having their lunch breaks in a semi-surreal, very modern, very abstract surrounding, which is quite bleak in a way. There's not much nature present. So yeah, it's quite ironic, or has quite a bit ironic twist, and it's a lot about consumption. And yeah, so you can see people standing around everywhere and consuming stuff. It's like in the real world. Actually, in my first series, in the On Pleasure Ground series, the idea was already there that it shall be a lot about consumption as well, and that products and people consuming them shall be quite present. And because I work with colors, I decided to introduce different colored drinks into this series, and one of them was also a red drink. And then at one point I had the idea came to me that this red drink can be a good symbol within my work, and I'm also very interested in generally how symbols work also throughout art history. And so I had this idea to create my own symbol and that was the red drink. And so I decided to give birth to it, if you want, as if it's a real product. I created an advertising campaign for it, which actually turned into the series, and also there's also a book about it, The Red Drink, or there's 2 books about it. So the idea for this series was that it goes from a typical advertising imagery where you see sexy people drinking or consuming the drink, it turns into quite a weird narrative which touches on different points of society, maybe from mass manipulation to exploitation if you want, but everything, as I always, very carefully hinted. And the color red is the only thing that really, like a red thread, runs through the entire series and basically stands for danger, you know, all very quite blatant, yeah. In the garden series, the idea was to create indoor gardens and show the inhabitants. Again, just an aspect of this parallel world. And what makes it so different in this case is that I used set building, and usually in the other series we discussed, I only used collage basically. So there were no sets at all, and I only photographed the people and props and maybe tiny elements. But in this case, I had entire sets built where I only added certain things in post-production here and there. And it was all about artificiality, which then is quite easy. You know, if you build a set, it's already artificial. So we just built very cheap under quotes, sets to make them look as plastic as possible with astroturf and no natural light, and then photographed the people inside it. Just because I love print and I think that it's the ideal media for photography, or ideal way to present photography, or at least I love it. So it was always my idea that this is how I want my works to be seen or to present them. Of course, it's also nice to have them big on the wall, etc. But I think this intimate moment of a book is really beautiful. Yeah, and so as time went on and I did basically one series after the other and stuff collected, then the idea came to put them all together in one book, also because they are sort of linked in a way, all my works, because basically I construct kind of a parallel world, and then each series shows different aspects of this world. Could be anything basically. I was always trying to work on this, etc. And then at one point I thought, okay, now I really have to get going, because it's something that you always push in front of you, you know, and postpone, because it's not so easy, etc. And where to find a publisher and stuff. I teamed up with a friend of mine. She's a really fantastic designer and runs a fantastic design studio, Studio Es in Vienna. I wanted to make the book not a book about my works or not a book about me, because I found that a bit weird, you know, I'm making a book about myself. And so I wanted the book to be part of my world and be like an artwork of its own, you know, subliminal messages, subliminal things with colors. And then it was another point which was hard, strongly discussed, whether it's okay to have nothing else on the cover, you know, have no title, etc. on the cover. And we only put it on the side. And then another idea was to make it as much a product as possible, you know, and as solid. I mean, that's a bit the beauty also about this specific cigarette type thing, that it's compact, solid type product. And so we took that idea and tried to make the book in the same way. So yeah, about this time of the pandemic, more than a year now, I had the chance to go to Istanbul. I mean, everything was a bit tricky here and there, you know, delays, problems, etc. Stuff got cancelled, work didn't happen, etc. But then, as I say, I got quite lucky and stuff did happen. You know, my book was published. Actually, I'm working on a project right now, going to be about labor, so about work as a topic. I'm already quite excited about it, thinking how I'm going to do it, where I'm going to shoot it. Thing is that I want to travel to find some new materials, and so that was slowed down a bit through the crisis now, but I hope that soon, now this spring, I can travel and then try to pull it through as soon as possible. And maybe what I can say is that I also follow another body of works which we haven't discussed here and which is a bit different, which is analog black and white photography, which actually has no post-production involved at all. It's pure photography, and it deals more with finding abstract qualities in the world, and basically I'm looking for the forms of art in the everyday world. And so I'm working on this continuous series, or with this practice, ever since I do photography, and it's also such a thing that constantly evolves, but basically it circles around this idea.